What's going on, guys? Welcome back. And it's been a while since I've talked about anything superhero related on this channel, but nonetheless, I am here to give my thoughts on Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse, because this is one of the very few superhero franchises I still have investment in. Ignoring some of the Marvel TV shows like The Falcon and the Winter Soldier, the last superhero movie I loved or even liked was the first Spider-Verse, which I still think is a really solid movie, although in retrospect, I do think it is kind of overrated for reasons I will discuss later in this review. As far as this film is concerned, I think it's really good, if not great, and improves on many aspects of the first film. For one, the animation is even more vibrant and expressive, utilizing several different styles to tell the story. In simple conversations between characters, the lighting constantly changes in the background to reflect their emotional states. A completely unnecessary detail, but one that adds so much to the experience. I suppose some people might consider this to be a spoiler, but we actually see Lego Spider-Man in what I believe to be the Blender animation style, which I guess isn't that surprising considering that Phil Lord and Christopher Miller, the directors of the Lego Movie, also worked on this film. Daniel Pemberton's score is also a lot of fun and contributes a great deal to the film as well, but I'd be lying if I didn't say I slightly prefer his score for Spider-Verse. That film was very experimental in the music department, but it did have that mundane, classically heroic sound, whereas this film sounds much more grand and epic. This film's prologue felt like a movie all in itself, recounting the life of a certain character before and after the events of Spider-Verse. And it was at that point I realized this film was going to improve on one of my biggest problems with the first one: the pacing. Spider-Verse is extremely frenetic and fast-paced. When a movie is fast-paced, people often say it's a strength, but in the case of Spider-Verse, I actually think it's a weakness, because things move so quickly. We barely spend enough time with certain characters and their relationships to one another before moving on to something else, which makes some, but not all, of the emotional payoffs ring hollow. The first third, or even half, of Across the Spider-Verse is spent showing us the everyday life of Miles Morales, developing the relationship between him and his parents, as well as the people around him. Miles' mom, in particular, feels like an actual character this time around, rather than your standard caring parent. Believe it or not, I've seen some people complaining about the first chunk of this film being slow-paced, but I love that. It means that hopefully the payoffs in the third film will be all the more powerful because of the time spent building up the characters in this one. I really appreciate the way they handled the relationship between Gwen and Miles. It was nuanced. There are hints of romance, just like in the previous film, but those don't take priority. The film isn't reliant on that so much as it is on the fact that these are just two people who share a strong bond and care a lot about each other. Whether or not that's close friendship or romance is left up to the interpretation of the audience. The tone balancing in this film was also immaculate. You guys know how much I hate an over-reliance on humor, especially in superhero films, where forced comedic moments undercut or completely ruin an otherwise good scene. As much as I really enjoyed the first Spider-Verse film, even it has a moment like this, when Stan Lee is telling Miles about how he knew Spider-Man and that the mask always fits eventually, only for the camera to pan over and reveal a sign that says "No refunds ever." reducing an emotionally resonant scene to a completely unnecessary joke. Across the Spider-Verse relies a lot on humor, but never to a point where it feels insincere. It is an extremely meta film, but unlike a lot of films that are meta for the sake of dumb fourth-wall-breaking jokes, it's actually a key storytelling device here, and is responsible for bringing about the main conflict of the film, which I found more compelling than anything in the previous one. There is a complex moral debate at the heart of this film, and funnily enough, it reminded me quite a bit of the conflict between Peter and Doctor Strange from No Way Home. But no surprise here, it's executed way better in Across the Spider-Verse. Where the conflict in that film was just stupid and nonsensical, here, the line between good and bad is blurred to some extent. We obviously root for Miles because he's the protagonist, but there's no denying that the characters he opposes have some validity to what they're doing. Oscar Isaac's character, Miguel O'Hara, despite being featured prominently in the marketing, doesn't play as large a role in the film as I thought he would. He acts more as a catalyst for certain events rather than a fully fleshed out character, but I assume that will change in the third film, and he does work far better as a thematic opposite to Miles than Kingpin did in the first film. Kingpin served his purpose as a brute force of nature in Into the Spider-Verse, but his connection to Spider-Man was ill-defined. I mean, he and Miles don't even meet until the end of the third act. And The Spot is another prime example of how well-balanced the tone is. He feels almost like an improved version of what they tried to do with Electro in The Amazing Spider-Man 2, a monster of Spider-Man's own making. In the beginning, he's a pretty funny and likable villain who you don't really take seriously at all, but as the film progresses, he naturally transitions into a legitimately menacing antagonist. Without spoiling anything, I want to talk about the ending of this film, because it has quite possibly the most effective cliffhanger I've seen since The Hobbit: The Desolation of Smaug almost a decade ago. Except, in that instance, most of us knew the outcome of that story, because we had already read the book. In this case, nobody knows how this story is going to wrap up, which makes it all the more exciting. Some people have actually criticized this ending, saying that it feels unsatisfying or unfinished, but I don't know what they were expecting. I went into this film knowing that it and the next one were going to be a two-parter, so I expected some sort of dramatic shift in the story by the end. This is a trilogy, after all, and this is the middle chapter. If you're going to criticize this, why don't you go complain about The Empire Strikes Back or The Dark Knight? If anything, this cliffhanger reminded me most of Back to the Future 2. Both Across and Beyond the Spider-Verse will be released a few months apart from each other, just like Back to the Future Parts 2 and 3, albeit with a slightly longer gap between them. Even some of the general plot beats in this film felt quite reminiscent of Back to the Future Part 2. There are some aspects of this film that I'm critical of. Some of the characters' decisions are questionable at best, and the motivations of others are confusing to me, but I'm willing to reserve judgment until I've seen the next film or rewatched this one, in case those things become more clear. It feels weird to say I'm actually looking forward to a superhero movie sequel, because the last time that happened, I was left incredibly disappointed. In case some of you didn't know, I used to like Avengers: Infinity War. Love it, in fact. But practically all the elements I liked in that film were unresolved or poorly paid off in Endgame. There were good ideas in those films, but the execution fell flat because they were condensed into 2 movies. The fact that these Spider-Verse films are being structured as a trilogy, and that they are taking their time in building up all these elements, gives me confidence that Across the Spider-Verse will be able to resolve this story in a satisfying way. I wouldn't say this film restored my faith in the superhero genre, But it did remind me that good superhero movies can and are being made. It just takes the right people being involved. The creative team on these films have proved that they care a hell of a lot about telling this story. And although I might not love these Spider-Verse films as much as everyone else, I can still respect the immense amount of effort put into crafting them, and I anxiously await the final installment in this trilogy. But that's pretty much all I have to say about Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse. What do you guys think? Do you think it improves on Into the Spider-Verse? Are you looking forward to Beyond the Spider-Verse? Just whatever your thoughts are, please let me know them all in the comments below. And of course, as always, I hope you guys have a great day. Take care.